conversations that he and I have had periodically over the last couple of months, and it was from those conversations that I knew you would benefit a great deal from how he was working this through for himself and how it's changing him, even for the better. So these first couple of questions are setups for what's to come. But Fred is going to be very willing to be candid with you about what his experience has been like. So here's the brief backstory. In the summertime, Fred is in California with his wife Sharon. They're visiting family. He's in very good health. In retrospect, he would tell you there were a couple of small medical things that maybe he would have paid a little more attention to, but really, he was doing fine, in robust health. And then all of a sudden, out of left field, he's hospitalized with an intestinal blockage. And they diagnosed the intestinal blockage as malignant. It's cancerous. Then they find out it's spread to his liver, both nodes, which means you can't take one out. It's inoperable. He just about, I would say, I don't know if you would, he just about died out in California because of the surgery that they had to do to remove the intestinal blockage. Then he recovered in California as much as he could, and he was able to fly home. And then we'll talk about the course of treatment that he's been on in the next question. So all I want you to do for us is let us in on what it was like for you and Sharon to have this kind of whiplash, where all of a sudden you go from being healthy and life being normal to being on your deathbed, very literally.
I want to say that any one of our experiences aren't worth a whole church service unless it brings us back to Jesus and to some biblical truths that we should be living by anyway. So, in fact, I don't even feel I need sympathy. Encouragement and support, yes, but I feel blessed at the spot I'm in. So I feel like gathering you closer to me and teaching you like I did for most of my career. I want to say that in advance. And then I should warn you that Sharon's been so nervous about me doing this. Some of the older people in the congregation will remember Art Linkletter and his interviewing children on TV. This is going back to my grade school years, you know. He would always start out with, "What did your parents say not to say?" Remember? It was hilarious. Sharon told me on the way here, "Now don't be morbid." And like I told her, I'm the least morbid person I know. But she had to teach. I'm kind of a planning, forward-looking person. And I would say, well, if I'm not dead yet, I will, you know. She says, you have to stop saying that. So now I'm saying Lord willing. She likes that better. You know. And Sharon doesn't like attention drawn to us, so I was told not to say anything about her, so I'm starting out with her. And she had an upset stomach this morning, which I'm sure she's being nervous for me, or just worried about what I will say, because, you know, that's normal. What was it like when I got the news? I was just surprised. It didn't hit me like depression or anger, or it was like, you got to be kidding. I'm exercising. I'm doing all my preventative screenings, and I was in better shape than I was years ago. And so my first reaction was, really, Jesus? How come? I thought I was on the right track. You know, and I said that to Pastor Chris once we had a chance to talk. He says, oh, you are on the right track. Being on the right track has nothing to do with it. It's not like you're paying rent, earning your place on the earth, and if you're not doing right, he takes you. That's not how it works. We faithful people are taken when it's time. So I kind of want to start out by saying, I have an advantage over you guys, because you think you're in control of your life. You're still planning. You have the illusion of control, and it is just an illusion. I have an approximate deadline. It's a gracious gift. I get to plan for my wife. I get to dispose of business stuff that she doesn't want to deal with. I get to make sure I'm good with my family. I've reviewed all my relationships I can think of. I don't think I have problems with anybody. What a gracious gift of time. I hope for some more time. But it really doesn't, on the whole scale of things, to be with Jesus is good, to be here is good. I'm okay with the spot I'm in. But surprise was my first reaction, especially because I had done the cancer screening 2 years ago, and they said, don't come back for 5 years. Somebody just didn't do it right. That's all there is to say about it. Since then, Pastor Chris has been very instrumental by giving me 2 challenges. The first one, when he saw me on a good day like today. I am quite distant from last week, Wednesday, when I had chemo. So I feel better and better every day until next Tuesday night, where I'm just irrepressible and don't want to sleep. And then Wednesday, I get my fatigue bomb. And I have chemo all day long at the hospital. Ron Brand always comes and sees me, the highlight of my fusion day. And then I can be sick for 3 days. Come on Thursday night, and the cell phone's too heavy to hold. So my weakness is on schedule. And right now, it's off schedule. So if I don't look sick to you, fine. I don't feel very sick either. But if you want to see me sick and pathetic, you can come next Thursday night.
So you touched on one of the other introductory things that we thought would be good for you to talk through, just because you're doing this and many of us have not. You're currently finishing up your first round of chemo. You've been under treatment now for several months. Why don't you, and you've done it a little bit already, but why don't you let us in even more on what it's like to just live in constant discomfort? Because even if it's not us right now, we're going to know people who are going through something like what you are. And it would be very helpful to us to understand how the pain and the discomfort affects you.
My good days aren't free from discomfort. If you can imagine drinking a really hot cup of coffee and having to spew it out and have burning to your tongue, that's what it feels like all the time. So I have to be careful what I eat. I have other real irritating symptoms, like my hands feel like you hit your funny bone, so that if I move my fingers much, they get numb and get needles in them. And so I have to wear black gloves now to type, which is irritating. I can't sleep. 2 nights this week I slept 2 hours and 3 hours. And other times Sharon drugs me and I sleep for 20 hours. So, in fact, the first time she did it, she didn't sleep because she thought I was dead. I never sleep that long. What it's like to be weak on my bad days is pure frustration. Imagine you wanting to go to the store, but it's too much work to walk to the car. Or needing something to accomplish a task, but getting out of the chair is too much. I can imagine my end days being just feeling wiped out all the time. Right now, I'm just wiped out a few days every 2 weeks. I am not accustomed to feeling like that. And maybe some of you already deal with that, and I'm with you. But here's the good side of weakness. I have to go back to my recovery days. By the way, I'm 15 years, 8 months minus 10 days clean and sober now. But I learned a ton during that process. And the first step is surrender. I'm out of control. Well, that's easy because I've got a disease I didn't go look for. You're out of control too, you just don't know it. Some of you. The second step is I recognize I have a higher power who's in charge and can do whatever he wants with me. And I'm good with that. Because that's the third step, surrender. I'm practicing the 3-step, 1, 2, 3, all the time in my weakness because it's my definition of being God dependent. I wish I had done it this well when I wasn't sick, which is kind of my message to you. One of them is to practice your God dependence like I'm beginning to learn right now.
It's a good transition to why I thought we should do this and why Fred graciously consented to do it. Fred will tell you, and you can already tell, this has been very powerful in shaping for him spiritually. And illness does that for all of us. Facing our own mortality does that for all of us. And that's really what we wanted to talk about most today, is how this is forming Fred spiritually as he's in this new chapter of his life. So the first thing we're going to talk about is, I know from having spent time with Fred, what Fred is going through has forced him to redefine the word is productivity, what it means to be productive. So why don't you tell them some of the things that we've talked about productivity and how it's really changed for you?
It didn't change right away. After my first round of chemo, I kind of expected to be sick the rest of my life. And I woke up one Monday morning after chemo, and I felt normal. I was so happy that I could jump up and down, I could scream, I could walk, I could do whatever I wanted because the effects of chemo were wearing off. I didn't know that was going to happen. In fact, we had flown to California to see the kids and say goodbye before chemo started because I figured this was the end of the end. And instead I got this break from weakness unexpectedly. And first thing I did is I called my commercial banker and said, hey, I saw an abandoned, foreclosed fourplex. Let's buy it. I left a message for him. He didn't call me back. He called my wife and asked if I was crazy. He was praying for me in his prayer group that I live, and I call him to go buy a building, you know. So, first step in productivity learning is I'm not the same guy I was. I can't do the same things, and by the way, my attention span is 1 week long, you know, because then chemo starts again. Pastor Chris gave me the challenge of being a different person and being okay with that. So, I'm a person of routine. I actually recommend you should be too. Because if I don't make a schedule and have a regular time of doing something, it doesn't happen. So I decided to invest in people's lives every day, since I can't work all day long anyway. But it was a more important thing to do than work. That's a big change. It's more important than work. So on my good week, 4 days a week, I meet with somebody important to me or needs encouragement. And I take them out for breakfast or lunch or coffee and encourage them. And I am having more blessing from that than anything I had anticipated. What a great way to spend an hour or two a day in investing in other people. And I wish I had started sooner. And isn't it a shame I had to get sick before I put aside the time to do it? Which is another message to you. Let's not get sick first before you do the right thing. I'm becoming okay with being less productive in business and activity terms. There's a truth that Oswald Chambers in his highest for my utmost, or the other way around.
Other way around.
He says that we act as if Jesus needs our activity. He really doesn't. He can create at a wish whatever he wants. He wants our love, my obedience and yours. The level of activity is actually irrelevant, I'm beginning to find. Because in sickness, I'm being blessed, and I'm still being, actually my business is up 25% by not paying attention. So what does that say about me?
Well, tell them about that, because I know part of what you've done is you've hired help.
Oh,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, why don't you, this is...
I can't be invested in people's lives and then let Shearer not pay the groceries. So I hired another PhD half-time, and I hired another person equivalent to a PhD. He's a clinical expert for the whole state in substance abuse. And those two people are picking up the slack from what I used to do. And tomorrow I interview another PhD. And I find it quite amazing that God's doing two things. He's bringing my business work that I didn't ask for, one. And secondly, people are giving me 5-year contracts when I know I'm terminally ill. And I think that's a miracle. Who in their right mind would do that? I think it's a Jesus thing. And I'm just responding for getting some help and getting that done. I'm just quite surprised again at God's generosity there. So my productivity investing in people has this flip side of the adjustments I had to do to make it possible. I wonder what adjustments you would have to do to make it possible for you.
Right. So Fred touched on this already before a little bit, but I know one of the other things that he's been working through and struggling with is how this new chapter of his life has forced him to rethink things like weakness and rest and slowing down. You can already tell from his answers, those are words that are a little foreign to him, but he's been in a crash course on learning those three things. So why don't you let him in a little more?
It's a crash course first on unlearning certain things. I'll tell you a brief story. When I was in early grade school, I wanted a new bicycle. Well, my father was a child of Dutch immigrants, worked on the farm. He was working class. He was a mailman. He didn't believe in handing his two sons anything except a room and food. So starting in second grade, I had to pay my life insurance. In third grade, I had to buy my clothes. In fourth grade, I picked up dental bills. And by the time I was in fifth grade, I was self-sufficient except for rent and groceries. Which, by the way, I asked him, are you going to charge me in sixth grade for living here? And he says, no, you get till you're 18. I had loving parents, but they had this sense of, I needed to learn how to be independent and take care of myself because no one will do it for you. So as an example, I wanted a bicycle, and somewhere in there, third grade or fourth. I shined shoes for 25 cents a pair. I had a paper route, and I did yards for the neighbors. And I earned the $60 necessary in 3 months to buy a bike because nobody was going to give it to me. After that, I learned that I could make $60 a summer. So I started buying my own vacation and flying to Iowa to see my cousins without my folks. You could fly for $60 on a rush seat. What do they call those? Standby. You could go as a kid and no adult with you in the 60s. So I was taking vacation without my folks, and I was buying my bicycles and paying my bills. So I was a little bit unique in being independent no matter what, right? So now I have to learn to be dependent. Like, what even is that? Sharon has observed that she doesn't think at times I need anybody. Well, that's not true. It's a little harsh, but I act that way sometimes. What it's like to be weak means to be dependent. That's like a dirty word to me, has been. I'm finding the silver lining in being dependent. I have some friends here in church, Pastor Chris included, and Ron, Tom and Linda Damstra, I hesitate to name all of you, who have come closer to me than what I ever expected would happen. That's amazing to me, because I haven't gone out and tried to be that person to other people before now, not very much. You're asking me to talk about a process that's going on still. Mm-hmm. I am not content when I'm weak. I have to work on that. How would you like every couple of weeks to lay around for 3 days, or at least 2, and do nothing that you would have considered important just recently? I have to make some important things I can be or do when I'm not active. And I'm not done with that. I am saying that Jesus is teaching me a couple of things: to have joy in my new condition, to look for the things I can learn, whether weak or on my good days, and to really value my family and my relationship with Jesus. And that's kind of easy to say, like, of course I value those when I'm not sick, right? I don't think so. It's where I allocated my time and my money and most of my thoughts. Where are those for you? Your time, money, and thoughts. They weren't always on my family, and not even most of the time. Imagine you getting my deadline tomorrow morning unexpectedly. The same thing would happen. Your priorities become crystal clear. It's kind of like, what was it, Carter who said, it's the economy, stupid? It's your family, stupid. If you're not walking with Jesus, that comes first, and the second is your family, and the rest can go away. So if you're spending a lot on the stuff that goes away, stop it. Who's that guy on TV that was the counselor that always said, stop it? Bob Newhart.
So I'm going to remember most. I don't know if I'm going to get this story verbatim, but it's close. So the first time I went in, after Fred got home this summer from California, and he had recuperated from his surgery, I went to his house. It was summertime. Fred lives in a beautiful kind of East Grand Rapids neighborhood. I love his street, right? Old houses, front porches. So he and I go and we sit on the front porch for, has to be 2 hours, right? And there we sit, Sharon joins us, and we're just talking. And we wave at his neighbor as she goes by. And we love his flowers. We've never seen his front yard. He has the best flowers in the world in his front yard. And as I stand up to give him a hug to leave, he looks at me and says, I don't think I've ever spent this much time on my front porch, right?
Never. 2 hours on the front porch would have been unheard of.
Right. Because in Fred's old way of thinking, that was unproductive.
True.
Right?
True. In fact, when I was teaching at University of Southern California, we got free 10 hours of clinical therapy every year. And I worked with a lot of clinical therapists who were professors, and they thought I was a basket case because I was so happy, and I had nothing going on inside. I told them, what you see is what you get. And so on a challenge, they told me to sign up for 10 therapy sessions. So I did, and got this wonderful guy who listened to me for 10 minutes of an hour session and says, stop, we don't need to do anymore. I already have an assignment for you. He says, first, I want you to put on some Levi's. Oh, but you don't have any, do you? And I didn't. And then I want you to go.
Hey, you've grown.
Yeah. Actually, I shrunk. I have bought new Levi's because I'm skinnier. Then he says, and after you put on your Levi's, I want you to go to sit on a lounge chair. But you don't have one, do you? And I didn't. And he says, and then I want you to go sit on your front porch. You have a porch, don't you? Yeah, I have a porch, but it's empty and I've never been on it. He says, you are to sit on that porch for 15 minutes and do nothing. That was my week's assignment. It was terrible. So that's where I started from.
Right. Now, Fred, when he was finishing answering this question, touched on this. This is from the last time I saw Fred. A couple of weeks ago, he and I were in his living room and we're talking, and I wrote down what he said because I wanted to remember it, to have him talk about it to you. When we were in his living room, he said, and I quote, people need to imagine what they'd do if they were in my situation, because that's how they should be living right now. Well, you talked about that a little bit. Why don't you expand on that a little more, Fred? Because I thought that was extraordinary.
Well, it's a truth that we live with all the time, sick or not, right? It's whose agenda am I and you living by? Are we setting our own goals? Is it about money and assets and security, or is it about service and love and being more like Jesus? There are actually two kinds of agendas out there that we have, and not many of us are able to make it all of Jesus's. And that's where I was. I've been working for years to try to clean up my priorities. And when I was definitely and terminally ill, that cleaned up my agenda like really great. But too bad it took that kind of incentive. I would really think about whose agenda you're completing and why, and fix it if it needs fixing, because that's what I learned.
So I want to finish with this quote from the same time in Fred's living room. This is the last time I saw him a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about today. And this is another quote that he gave me, okay? And this is for all of you who have had the fortune of listening for the last 25 minutes. He said to you, and to me, the interviewer as well, he said, if your life isn't changed by what we've talked about this morning, then you're not listening.
It's hard to get our attention, isn't it? Got my attention by surprising me with a diagnosis. What does it take to get your attention? You want to take God's subtle hints, like a message like this? God prays if you can listen and do it without a disaster first. That's kind of what I'm saying too.
We probably have time for maybe one or two questions. We wanted to carve out a little time at the end. If anyone wants to ask Fred about anything that he said today, or maybe go in a different direction, I know that Fred would be very willing to answer whatever it is you'd like to ask or follow up on. So if you just raise your hand, all right, right there.
So like you, I've had to grow up feeling like I had to take care of myself. For instance, I made sure I got my own senior pictures, my own cap and gown. If I wanted something, a lot like you, I found a way to get it. And you've really changed my way of thinking, and I was going to try to teach my son, who's just under 2, the same way. Not as harsh, but, if you want it, you get it. How would you raise a kid to be dependent and yet independent at the same time?
You probably don't know, we raised 7 children. I can't say they were all home runs, but they're all good people. None of them are here, so. So take that with a grain of salt here. I didn't lead my children to expect extras from me. And in fact, at one time, a teenage daughter said to me, "That makes me very unhappy." I think it was she wanted to stay out till 2 a.m. with a boyfriend or something. And I said, "Oh, it's not my job to make you happy, sweetheart. I'm your parent. I'm going to try to raise you the way you should live when you're an adult. And then you can make your own mistakes if you want." I know the first way to do it is not to be the parent who gives in to everything. I think the second way is not to give in to nothing, Like, for instance, I never gave my children benefits without effort. Like, I don't do allowances for doing nothing. But I generated businesses for them that they could work in and make good pay. In fact, my daughters nearly bankrupted me when they were 6th graders and 5th graders, because I gave them data entry to do for me, and I said I'd pay them $1 a sheet because I thought they'd be so slow. They were making like $30 each a day, These kids are sharp. So one of the things I did was help them find their competencies and reward them. And I feel like Sharon could add more to this and better. She was always the nurturer. And the kids would go to her first with major personal problems. Because I wouldn't say this, but my attitude was like, get over it, get a life, And she was the sustainer, which a good parent would be. Those are some of my first thoughts.
Very good. Maybe one more? Anybody want to ask about anything or follow up on anything? Fred will introduce you to Sharon, by the way, afterward, Caleb.
If I'm whole and not battered.
Here we go. One more right behind you. This is Ron Brand.
Yeah,
that Fred mentioned.
Yeah, when you told me about that 5-year contract, and you mentioned it today, I kind of wondered, I thought to myself, well, he could sign the contract for a lot of money, and then his business would go bankrupt, or wherever it would go when he leaves, if he's not here in 5 years. I just wondered how you're dealing with contracts that you don't necessarily think you'll be here for, you hope you will. How do you deal with that?
That's the way we ought to do everything, right? You're sick or not, you don't know if you're going to last, whatever this plan is you have. So you say to everybody, I'm completely transparent. If everything goes the way I hope, this is what will happen. If it doesn't go that way, let's renegotiate. That's how I deal with it. So I go to every single community partner I have, and I've been doing this 40 years, so there's a lot of them. And I say, hey, I'm terminally ill. I'm half the time functional, and I'm adding staff. Stay with us, and we'll see how well it goes. And you get 30 days at any time you can let us go. So transparency is working. That's actually a pretty good question, because I'd like to keep my prior life going without being as fully invested in it. So it's kind of trial and error.
There's a nifty little passage in the Bible, if you want to check it out, on this very topic. It's at the end of the letter of James in your New Testament, chapter 4. It's about the last 10 verses. It addresses exactly the question, believe it or not, that Ron asked and Fred answered. Yeah, about being a mist in the morning. Right? Remember that?
I want to say a thank you, too.
Yeah.
When I was at my lowest point in the hospital in California, Tammy sent me a recording of being anointed in oil and absentee. I was so encouraged. It was the highlight of a terrible time. So thank you.
That's a great transition. Will you thank Fred for doing what he did this morning?
All praise to Jesus, right?
It's the first one in a while, pal.
Yeah, I guess.
They do that for me every week.
Ron and Denise had a comment to make just at the end.
Yeah, shoot.
My comment is, my younger brother starts cancer treatment for chemotherapy next week for his leukemia. As a family member, I feel very helpless. What are some of the comforts that your family have done that helps you and them to make you feel better without, he doesn't want, he's grown with this too, and I don't want to treat him like a sick person. So are there some things that really helped you with your treatment going in for chemo and the days after?
Yes, there are. I've been an elder for off and on most of my life. And I found something that's applicable to your answer. Most people in need don't really need you to solve it. They just kind of appreciate your being there. What do you think, Russ? Something that's about true. You don't need to have magic words, and you don't need to make it better, and you don't need to solve it. But to be there and say, tell me what it's like for you right now, is really a gift you can give anytime. Secondly, I think that making a recurrent, intermittent visit face-to-face is kind of important. I don't have anybody making a pest of themselves, but I truly appreciate the occasional call or visit. I usually try to meet them at a coffee house so we can do it in a fun way. But what you say to another sick person depends on where they're at, right? You don't know that unless you listen, so go just be present and listen. I wouldn't right away bring presents or gifts or food. Most of us in cancer treatment aren't hungry, you know. But listen to see what they would like. I think I'm done watching romantic comedy videos. Don't bring one of those. But the next guy in cancer might really like them, so listen to see what they need.